I'm Andrew Bridgen. I'm the independent MP for North West Leicestershire in the very centre of the UK, and I'm leading the charge in the UK Parliament around the issues of the vaccine harms from the COVID-19 experimental jabs, excess deaths, opposition to the WHO pandemic agreement and the amendments to the international health regulations. And also I'm extremely sceptical about the net zero targets, and that they're actually going to be a vehicle to bring in digital ID and digital currency.
Yes, thank you for that, Andrew. Before we talk about your widely viewed debate on the COVID-19 pandemic response and trends in excess deaths, I'd like you to talk a bit, what led you to being expelled from the Conservative Party back in April 2023?
Well, I was suspended on the 11th of January for a tweet where I retweeted Dr. Josh Gettr of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and added a line that I'd been informed by a world-leading cardiologist that the rollout of the experimental COVID-19 vaccines was the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. It was purely an excuse. The party were very, very upset with me for speaking out on the 13th of December 2022. I felt pushed and obliged to speak out when the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency at the end of November 22 had asked the government for authorization for the experimental jabs for healthy babies down to the age of 6 months. I felt there was very, very minimal risk from COVID for that cohort, but a considerable risk of 1 in 800 of serious adverse events from the vaccines. And I knew there'd be a huge political backlash for speaking out, but I thought it was an argument I could win. And although the government said that I was a conspiracy theorist, basically, and it wasn't widely reported, it wasn't reported in the mainstream media, what I can tell you is that the UK government never dared authorise those vaccines for under 5s in the UK. So I felt that was a win. And after that, the party had conversations with me where they basically told me that they wanted me to shut up about the vaccines, and they wanted to cover it up for 20 years. In fact, the exact phrase at the end of my discussion with them was, Andrew, there is currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may well be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world with all the personal risk for you, which that will entail. And I left the meeting at that point and said, I think we're done. And then they expelled me.
Wow. Would you be able to share who that particular person was?
No, because he will deny it, but I'll say I know that's exactly what he said. So there's no point getting into that at this stage. And well, I mean, the rest is history. I also spoke out on the vaccine safety, of the efficacy and safety of the booster on the 17th of March 2023. And again, I only quoted the government's own figures on the number needed to vaccinate, which was horrendous. I think in the healthy 40 to 49-year-old cohort on the government figures, it was well over 900,000 people had to be vaccinated or boosted just to keep one person from presenting at hospital, not going into ITU, with COVID symptoms, which meant we were probably putting 1,150 people at risk of death or serious harm from the vaccines. And again, the government said that it was nonsense, but 3 weeks later, they upped the minimum age limit on the boosters to 75, and the immunosuppressed. Well, I mean, they shouldn't be taking it anyway, because it is suppressing your immune system straight away. But at least that was progress. So it's very interesting. I think whatever I've done, it has had an impact. And regarding to excess deaths, I had been putting in for a debate since January 23 every week, and they were all refused on the basis they were unlucky in the shuffle. So 26 times, and I can only put in on a sitting week.
What do you mean by unlucky in the shuffle?
That's what comes back on your response when every week you put in for debates, and it says, you haven't been selected. So you can see why I don't play the lottery, can't you? I'm just unlucky. In the summer of 23, I produced a little mini documentary, The Truth About Thalidomide, the True Story, and about how that was covered up. And I discovered that although thalidomide was withdrawn in the UK in 1961, the word thalidomide was not mentioned in the House of Commons until 1972. And a ruling of the Strasbourg Court, 3 judges ruled in their judgment that speakers of the House of Commons had deliberately suppressed all debate on thalidomide for 11 years. So sadly, it was, most of the deaths of the children were before birth or at birth, and that was ended in 61. And the children with the deformities would have been 11, 12, 13 years old by then.
Yeah.
And no one had been able to speak about it at all. So it's all happened before. I did send that. It's interesting. I did send that to the Speaker of the House of Commons, and within a week, I'd got a date for a debate suddenly on excess deaths.
Oh,
so I had it's only an adjournment debate of half an hour, where I spoke for 25 minutes, and the minister got to speak for 5 minutes in response, but it got a lot of stuff on the record. That was on the 20th of October, 2023, and that was probably one of the very first times that excess deaths were mentioned in any elected chamber anywhere in the world.
Yes.
Following that.
And I just wanted to, before you go on, Andrew, you were pretty much alone in the chamber, weren't you? How many of your fellow MPs had joined?
Very few. 1 or 2 out of 650. But I managed to arrange to have some experts come over to a committee room for the 4th of December last year. So people like Dr. Ryan Cole and Dr. Pierre Corey. We had Peter McCullough on video, Mike Geerdon on video, Steve Kirsch, the analyst, came over. And of course, we had Professor Angus Dalgleish, and we had Dr. Robert Malone. So we had some big hitters over, and I managed to get 24 MPs from across the House to come and listen for a couple of hours and ask questions. And following that, they signed a petition, and I got a 90-minute debate in Westminster Hall, the subsidiary chamber, which I think was the 16th of January this year. I spoke for 33 minutes, and the demand to speak was such that the backbench contributions were limited to 3 minutes. So that gave me good grounds then to come back with another petition signed by 24 MPs from across the House, and you only need 16. And then the House had to give me a debate in the main chamber, and we had that last Thursday, the 18th of April. We got 2.5 hours, and we used all the time up. And I would suggest that watch the video and see the public response from the public gallery, which was unprecedented, the cheering from the public gallery. That's never happened like that before. And yes, bear in mind, it's through bulletproof glass. You can't hear anything.
I know. I wanted to ask you that about Andrew. How did that, I mean, it was quite sensational. So this is at the end of your first address. You hear this sort of eruption of applause coming from the gallery. And obviously, we can just see you're in the chamber below. We can't see the people clapping, but the noise was very, it pierced through. And then how did that make you feel?
Well, tremendously proud and tremendously humbled that the public were with me. The public gallery was full, and I think that sent a message that the chamber was obviously clearly very sparsely populated. I think there were about 15 or 16 MPs in there.
Yeah.
But the public interest was massive.
Yes.
And because it was my debate, I got to open. It was interesting. I prepared another 30-minute speech, but I was told 10 minutes before I was due to speak that I could only speak for 15 minutes. So that I had to alter my speech at the last minute. I managed to negotiate 20 minutes, but I had to ditch a third of my speech.
Why, sorry to interrupt you, why did they tell you last minute that you had to cut down your speech?
That's a question you'd have to ask them. It's just one of those unfortunate things that happens to me. But it happened last time I spoke as well. They told me at the last minute that my time would be cut. It would appear to be a strategy to try and wrong foot you. I think actually what they actually did was it made the speech far more punchy. And yeah, the public support was fantastic. There were hundreds and hundreds of people who couldn't get into the public gallery to watch. Such was the demand for that debate. So after we finished at 5 o'clock in the evening, I went out and gave a speech in Parliament Square to thank the people who'd come to support, who couldn't get in.
And how many people were there outside?
I think of 400.
Yeah, many.
400. The crowd's getting bigger.
It is growing. I mean,
and the speech has been watched millions and millions and millions of times around the world, and other contributions. I mean, Neil Hanvey, the Alba MP from Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, and that's Gordon Brown Prime Minister's old seat. Yeah, he made a very good contribution of 30 minutes with interventions, and that's been watched millions of times as well. And Danny Kruger, the MP for the Conservative MP for Devizes, was fairly supportive, as was Chris Chope, the Conservative MP for Christchurch, and of course a very good contribution from Graham Stringer, a veteran Labour MP. So we are starting to get the numbers, but it's going to be some time before I can get another debate, and we can't have another debate on the same topic, so we'll have to change the title. But I mean, it's interesting. There was some minor reporting of the speech and the debate in the national press, in the Evening Standard, the London newspaper, but there's been no mention, and I think this is where they're very vulnerable, on the midazolam and morphine NG 163 issue, and also no comment at all anywhere in the national press about the links to cancer from the vaccines, which again, I think whenever Parliament doesn't want to discuss anything with the mainstream media, and I think that's where they're vulnerable from experience.
Would you care to elaborate on the NG 163's NICE's protocol? And NICE, just for people who don't know, stands for the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. Be interesting to hear more about that.
Well, the NHS, the National Health Service, is run on protocol guidelines, and their NG is NICE Guideline 163, and that was introduced in April 2020 as a treatment for COVID-19, and it was the starting dose was 2.5 milligrams of midazolam, which is a huge dose, probably at least five times more than anyone, without titration, Sonia. So no allowance for the weight or the vulnerability.
Also, not to do with your body size, that's like a flat kind of
flat, and of course an underweight elderly person, that it was basically going to put them straight into full sedation, and then obviously with further doses of midazolam, death would ensue within 24 hours.
Yes,
it's a respiratory suppressant, especially with morphine, with a barbiturate. It's even more respiratory suppressing. And my question, one of the main questions, was how stupid it was that you would consider there were basically two tracks of treatment for people who came in with COVID. And bear in mind, there'd been no early treatment, so you were told to go home until your lips turned blue, take paracetamol.
Yeah.
The average time to death from being diagnosed with COVID was 18 days. Well, it is a little known fact that viruses burn out after 7 days. So none of those people actually died of COVID-19 because the virus was long gone. They would have died of secondary infections, probably pulmonary pneumonia. And if they'd been treated with the normal treatments for that, which would be antibiotics or steroids,
Yes.
they would have survived. So people then presented in a poor condition at hospital, and they were either ventilated or put onto NG163, and pretty much either of those treatment tracks were a death sentence.
I was doing a bit of research on this, Andrew, because obviously I've covered your debates, and to do with the NG163 protocol, there was a group of doctors who wrote a rapid response letter to the BMJ, and that was sort of around early 2020, a group of palliative consultants in palliative medicine. And they were warning, they were saying this is really dangerous, this sort of the use of opioid use and sedation. And they were basically raising their concerns. And it appears that NICE just ignored their warnings. Why do you think?
I don't know. I spoke to the professor who wrote that letter, the open letter to the BMJ,
Yes.
Professor Sam Axenazi.
Yes.
He's retired now and he's quite willing to speak. And I think there were 9 other palliative care doctors who wrote an open warning letter with regards to NG163, and they were just ignored. It's interesting, though, that NG163 evolved into basically NG191, and on the 30th of November last year, new guidance came out which took midazolam out. So I did ask the minister, if that was an admission that midazolam should never have been used for the treating of COVID's-like symptoms through NG163, which was the precursor to NG191. And it's also interesting that NG163 has been removed from the NICE website.
Yes.
Whereas every other redundant guideline protocol, they're still all there. The only one that's missing is NG163. Why would they just remove that one protocol and not any of the other historic ones that are no longer in use or have been superseded? I'm still waiting for all those answers from the minister. I'm told that I might have to wait 12 weeks from the debate to get the written answers, which seems an awful long time. I think I may be pressing the government on these issues because that they're tremendously important. So yeah, and there's been a furore because I've posted parts of my speech online. I've clipped the 20-minute speech down, and the bit about NG163 got a community guidance underneath it saying this is not true, but that only stayed up. That was from Full Fact, but that only stayed up for about half an hour, and then they had to take it down because it was true, which is quite interesting.
Oh, yes.
So that's had a bit of the Streisand effect on that tweet, to be honest.
Right. Yes, I'm sure it has. You opened your statement with saying we are witnesses to the greatest medical scandal in this country, in living memory and possibly ever. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, I think when you've got a medication, experimental treatment that's being given out in the numbers to the percentage of the population, the 1 in 800 severe adverse event rate, the number of excess deaths we've seen since the pandemic, which is more than people who died due to German bombing during the Second World War, that is significant. It is very interesting as well, Sonia, that I made a lot of noise about the excess deaths, and after the debate we had on the 16th of January, which was well attended by colleagues and raising awareness, suddenly the Office of National Statistics decided to rebase. So they basically recalculated the baseline population, which increased the expected deaths,
yes,
which obviously removed a lot of the excess deaths. So a system we've used for years.
Right.
Yeah, and it's amazing the timing of that, and very helpfully, the new system for calculating the baseline population to extrapolate to the expected death rate is very complicated and opaque. But the model they've used increases the deaths in 2020 and 2021 and minimises the deaths in 2023. Well, you couldn't really make it up. There's no transparency.
I just want to clarify that point, Andrew. So based on your debate in January, shortly after that, the Office of National Statistics revised their calculations. When was that exactly? Was it around February?
Within weeks. When I gave the speech on the 16th of January, yeah, the government figures showed a 5% excess death rate in 2023. We were in 2024, obviously, and the highest increase was in the 50 to 64-year-olds, so not the most elderly, and that was 13% excess deaths in that age group.
And Andrew, why do you think the ONS are recalculating?
I think they're part of a huge cover-up. I've written to them with information from analysts and said, look, if you release this data in this format, we'll be able to assess whether and that went to the head of the Office of National Statistics in the UK, Mr. Diamond, and some 7-8 weeks later, I got a response, is the calculations and data collection format you want is going to take a lot of work, and we're not doing it because the vaccines are safe and effective.
Wow.
That is basically what the letter said from the head of the Office of National Statistics. Talk about prejudging. So we're not going to do the work because the vaccines are safe and effective. Well, we know they're not safe and effective. It was interesting that in the debate last week, I think I debunked safe and effective. Neither front bench in their responses mentioned the phrase safe or effective.
Yes, yes. It is astounding, and obviously we're all aware of how that was just drummed into every, it's safe, it's effective.
Well, I did drop the fact that safe and effective was the marketing slogan for thalidomide, and since that scandal, pharma companies are not allowed to use the phrase safe and effective for any medication without caveats. But of course, during COVID-19, they didn't have to, because their marketing agency was effectively the politicians and the civil servants and the media. And yeah, they hypnotized the public with safe and effective. But it's been done before.
I mean, that kind of sort of speaks to collusion, doesn't it, Andrew? And why do you think that happened in back then?
Lobbying power of big pharma is enormous. I mean, it's got bigger since COVID because we just had a huge transfer of wealth from the people to these big pharma companies. So they've got even more money to buy politicians and civil servants. Which
leads me to my question would be, Andrew, why is it only you and a few others who are speaking out, MPs who actually are raising awareness on the lack of safety, the lack of efficacy for these experimental shots?
I think it's a big club and we're not in it, probably, those who are speaking out. Some of my colleagues know and won't speak out. Some of them are damaged themselves by vaccines and won't speak out. Some have got very close relatives who, when one senior politician came to see me last July and said that her sister had taken the Moderna booster and was paralysed from the neck down. Guillain-Barré syndrome. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to hear that, but you're going to speak out now that you know. And she said, well, the doctors are fairly confident that she'll be able to walk again. I said, well, and she said, she doesn't want any publicity. I said, well, you don't have to name names, but you know now, so you really have a duty to speak out. And she never did. Other MPs have told me that they had 2 micro heart attacks after the second Pfizer jab and wouldn't take any more, but they won't speak out. MPs' wives have told me that their husband now has got heart condition following the vaccination, but they won't speak out. And I think some of them are obviously compromised. Some of them are scared. Some of them don't think, given the forces that are piled against us, that we can win. So what's the point of trying? And of course, the punishment that's been meted out to me by the political party I served for 2 decades, and the attacks in the media against my reputation, half of that was to punish me, but half of it was to scare the other MPs and say, look, if you speak out, this is what you're going to get. And it's worked.
So you think they used you as an example, sort of?
Well, it does say in Chairman Mao's little red book of Revolutionary War on the inside page, kill one, intimidate a nation, and that's basically, that still works, doesn't it?
Yes. Andrew, what would you say to those who call you an anti-vaxxer? I mean, I read recently, including your own wife, there was a report in the Times saying you joined a cult of the anti-vax. So,
well, it's that Sonia, that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I did also say in the speech that we need to, I'm not, being accused of being an anti-vaxxer, but I'm, as if I oppose the vaccines on some sort of ideology or ideological grounds. But it is patently not true. I am actually double vaxxed with AstraZeneca and vaccine harmed. And intelligent people do need to be able to tell the difference between, people who are neither anti-vax or pro-vax. But, I'm fundamentally against a medical product which A, doesn't work, and B, causes significant harm to a proportion of the people who take it. I mean, that seems to me a very logical position. Yeah. I'm just anti-bad pharmaceuticals. These experimental pharmaceuticals are still being pushed onto people, and people need to make informed choice. And to do that, they need to have all the facts. Well, they're not going to get the facts from the mainstream media.
No. And you also admitted in your speech, Andrew, that you were harmed by these vaccines.
Yes.
How are you suffering now? How is your health?
It's better than it was a couple of years ago, but I've got a lot of allergies I never had. So that's my immune system's damaged. Never had hay fever until I took the jabs, and I have it chronically. I've also got a lot of food allergies now that lots of food I can't eat. I came out in hives for 7 months after the jabs, which I've never had before. And speaking to a lot of my friends who had the same jabs, I mean, people who've had minor skin conditions all their life, suddenly they're covered in eczema or psoriasis where they used to have a little bit. It was never detectable. So the vaccines, in my opinion, and my own experience, have seriously damaged my immune system. And anything that damages your immune system is going to make you more prone to disease and also more prone to cancer.
Yes.
And it's interesting that the weekend I met with some people from the Netherlands and an analyst who'd managed to do software which could grab and analyze all the data from the European Medicines Agency. And he took me through. I mean, what he's got is unbelievable. And he can present the data in various ways.
Who has this software? Someone from the Netherlands you were talking
Yes, I've passed them over to Hart so that the data can be analysed. But you know what the biggest reported side effect of having the COVID-19 vaccines was across the whole of the European Union? To catch COVID.
Yeah.
Yes.
They call it breakthrough infections, don't they?
Breakthrough infection, but the biggest side effect, which was, well, I mean, that says it all, but it's not just COVID. I mean, the Cleveland, Ohio experiment from over a year ago clearly shows that the more jabs you had, the more likely you were to catch COVID. Well, I put it to you that that's because it's damaging your immune system. And you're not only more likely to catch COVID, you're more likely to catch anything else that's going around. And of course, anything that damages your immune system makes your body, yourself, more prone to cancer.
Yes. I mean, when I was analysing these for the periodic safety update reports submitted by Pfizer to the European Medicine Agency, this was probably about a year ago, I wrote for Children's Health Defence Europe, and yes, the COVID-19 infections were one of the main side effects. Catching.
Well, they are safe and effective, aren't they?
Yes, of course. Apparently, allegedly. Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit quickly about the regulatory agencies. Obviously, the UK's MHRA, in the US we have the FDA, EMA in Europe. Why do you think these agencies so rapidly approved these experimental gene-based shots? Obviously, they're not conventional vaccines. Anyone who does any sort of research or studies them, how were they able to greenlight them. And when we know there's just so much evidence of harm, it's mounting daily. What do you think has happened there? And when people say these regulatory agencies are now not fit for purpose, would you agree with people who say that?
I would agree, and I think that our regulatory agencies around the world, rather like probably our politicians, have been captured. When you've got 80% of the funding for the MHRA being from the industry, and effectively a revolving door between industry players and the regulator, I mean, clearly there's a huge conflict of interest there. When you've got the Vaccine and Immunisation Committee advising the government and declaring over £1 billion of personal investments in big pharma, that's a conflict of interest as well. So I think for a long time our regulators have been captured, and it would appear that every institution.
Would you say including Parliament as well?
Yes, clearly. I mean, the symbol of our Parliament is a portcullis, and that's supposed to be the last defence of the castle when the drawbridge has been destroyed or the gates have been destroyed, and that is to protect the people. Well, I put it to you that this Parliament has failed to protect the people. MHRA has failed to protect the people. The FDA have failed to protect the American people.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, unfortunately, it will be the biggest medical scandal in history. I want to make sure it's the last.
Yes.
And that's going to require radical change. And people who are responsible to be held to account.
Yes. What type of reform do we need, Andrew? Would you be able to just even sort of briefly?
Well, we're going to need regulators who are independent of the industry that they're regulating. We need a better way of funding science research through our universities. We've got some excellent universities in the UK, but they have been completely bought through funding grants by big business and big pharma. And our politicians, I mean, we need radical reform. I mean, this is a sham democracy in the UK. For me, we need to move to a direct democracy model. So if it were my choice tomorrow, I would abolish the House of Lords. They have been useless at protecting the people as a second chamber. I would halve the number of MPs. I would increase the pay and make sure there was no external interests allowed whatsoever. And you serve for the time you serve, and then you can go back and do something else, but not while you're doing it. And I would have legislation brought forward in our chamber, and every 3 months we'd have to go to a debate and referendum of the people, and that the people would then decide what the laws are. This is very much along the lines of the Swiss model. They've been using that system for 150 years. Their average income is twice that of the UK, and they haven't been involved in a war for any of that time.
Right.
That sounds like a pretty good model to me.
And that is what you refer to when you say the direct democracy model? Basically,
yes, putting the people will have the final say on what laws will be inflicted upon them. And also we need our institutions, we need to decentralize so that things that have happened, we've had a constant centralization of power across the whole of the UK to London. We need to decentralize health and other critical issues more locally, so that if we're going to have a problem, it can't be coordinated across the whole of the health service. And then it's more obvious if you've got a problem in this area because something's gone wrong, because it's not gone wrong in this area, we're doing something different. This one size fits all leads to absolute disaster.
I was going to talk a bit about that. Do you see this?
And that brings us on to the WHO and yes, why that would be a disaster, because that would be something of a disaster of the whole world having one policy, which when it goes wrong will be catastrophic for the total of humanity.
Yes. So we know that this vote is going on ahead in, is it May? Well, yes, next month, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's the 26th of May.
Yes. For people who might not be familiar with the revised international health regulations, essentially it's the new pandemic treaty being proposed by the World Health Organization. Would you care to elaborate a bit on that?
How long have we got, Sonia? This is a big issue. Well, basically, it's the WHO, who I believe are discredited by their advice that they gave at the last pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. Their advice was advisory. Most countries took it, and it was, I think, a litany of disaster. They want to make their advice to be binding. They want to give the Director General of the WHO the ability to call a public health emergency of international concern and take sweeping powers, which will usurp all of our so-called democratic parliaments and political accountability. It would make Dr. Tedros or whoever's his successor basically a one world government while there's a pandemic or a threat on it. It doesn't have to be a human pathogen. It could be an animal pathogen, or even he could call it because he thinks there's some threat to the environment somewhere. So it's this climate. Yeah, it's a one health policy where the WHO then say that health affects every part of our lives, every aspect of our lives affects our health. Therefore, they have power over every part of our lives. They'd have the ability to shut any business down in the world for no reason. They would have the ability to impose lockdowns, mandates of experimental vaccines. They talk about vaccines in 90 days without human testing at all. The only thing that can be is more of these mRNA vaccines, so-called. So basically, you're talking about the worst parts of what we saw over the last 3 years being inflicted by an unaccountable body. So the WHO are part of the United Nations. They're unelected, they're appointed, they're unaccountable. They don't pay tax anywhere in the world, even local taxes, and they are diplomatically immune from prosecution. So there's, if once Mr. Tedros took his powers, if he's given them, and I'll never vote for them, there's nothing you, I, or anyone else in the world could do to oppose what his decisions were inflicted upon us. There isn't a court anywhere in the world that has a jurisdiction to hold him to account. That is ultimate power. And putting someone who's unaccountable and elected, not paying tax and immune from prosecution, in charge of the world, and what could possibly go wrong, Sonia?
Exactly, and also you've got to talk at you've got to look at the way the WHO is funded. China funds
again, like our regulators. Yes, well, I mean, Tedros himself was only placed
foundation. China, you've got who's fund. You know, you've got to look into that and how that's sort of the knock-on effect, so to speak. But
the current Director General, Dr. Tedros, was only placed there by an unholy alliance of Bill Gates and the Chinese Communist Party. The UK government actually opposed his appointment at the time, and now my Parliament, through these two instruments, the Pandemic Agreement, Treaty, Accord, whichever you want to call it, it keeps changing its name, which we will get a vote on both houses, which I think my Parliament's going to pass because none of them will read it. They'll be told to vote for it. And then we've got these amendments to the international health regulations, which are equally damning. And I think my Parliament's going to treat those as only amendments to an existing treaty and no vote. And the only debates we've had on any of these issues have been public petition debates brought on by over 100,000 people.
yes,
And they've been very sparsely attended. And again, this is now joining the list of the many things with vaccine harms, excess deaths, WHO, things that my Parliament don't want to talk about, and the media do not wish to report on. So that's the red flag flying straight away.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
let's face it, if we get the WHO treaties through, I mean, if they go through, I mean, the red flag will be flying. We're entering a sort of dark age of communism by the back door.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's a fundamental threat of our, of our freedom.
It's the end of accountable, any semblance of parliamentary accountability and democracy.
Sovereignty.
Yeah. And it will fundamentally change the relationship between every citizen and the state in every country around the world.
Yes. Do you see this as just another form of tightening the grip of control on the population? Do you see it as that?
Yes, and I also see it as draconian measures can be brought in, and so-called elected governments will be able to say, well, you know, we've got a pandemic or an emergency. It's not us that's doing it to you. It's these other people in Geneva, the WHO. But we've got to do it anyway. So we're going to lock you in your homes, and you can't see your relatives, and you've got to take these experimental medicines, otherwise you won't be able to allow out your home. I mean, this is crazy. This is a dystopian future. And it needs to stop. And it can only stop when the public say, no, we're not having it. And that's in 196 states around the world. So the WHO is the same as the UN.
And I was going to say, for MPs like yourself speaking up against it, you know, I mean, it's, you know, attention to this. That's...
Well, I mean, of course, the government will say that we're not going to give them any sovereignty. Well, that's just that you read the treaties and see what it says. And yeah, I mean, governments unfortunately don't always level with the people, do they?
They don't. They don't. I just wanted to briefly ask, what are your plans for the future, Andrew? I mean, I know you you briefly joined the Reclaim Party. Why did you resign?
I think that there was limited resources. Lawrence Fox is a pretty big character, and he likes to rule the roost, and there wasn't really room for a campaign with an MP to get re-elected. So, and also, I think the way forward is independence. I've come to the conclusion, the offering I'll put to my constituency in North West Leicestershire is, you can either have an MP who represents a party in your constituency, or you can have an MP who represents you in Westminster. But I'm not convinced you can have both anymore, given that the parties want your loyalty to be to them, and I think your loyalty should be to the people in your constituency. I mean, the last interview I gave when I was cancelled after the 13th of December 2022 to the BBC, they asked me, why are you sacrificing your career on the hill of vaccine harms? And I said, that's because that's the hill you're killing my people on.
Yes, yes. I mean, I do commend you, Andrew, for your bravery in speaking out. I know there's been a lot of backlash against you. What has been, have you received sort of any death threats? And I'm just curious, what has been the type of...
Yeah, there was, they tried to put the rumours out in January last year that I was going to commit suicide, which was fairly appalling. I did have a cabinet minister who came up to me a year last February and said to me, you can speak out about the vaccines all you want to, but you're vaccinated, so you'll be dead of cancer soon, and walked off. Charming chap. Okay. I thought he was my friend once upon a day. Yeah, all sorts of things have happened to me. Yeah, my wife's divorcing me, and I couldn't get a divorce lawyer, so I went to 6 firms and no one will take me on. I'm blacklisted from that. I've not had an accident, and I have a claim on my car insurance for 25 years. I've got a certificate with 12 years no claims bonus, which is the most you can have in the UK. I can't get an insurance company that wants to insure me.
I'm going to ask you, Andrew, has it been worth it speaking out?
Yeah, it has. Well, the alternative doesn't bear thinking about. You can sell your soul to the devil any day you want to, but you'll never be able to buy it back. And I'm comfortable where I am. Looking back, yeah, I think this is where I needed to be. And, you know, this happens that when I was at university many decades ago, you know, I studied biological sciences with biochemistry, genetics, virology, and behavior. And they were just the things I needed for today, weren't they?
Do you feel there was some divine providence in that you happened to, that's what you said?
I think I'm very comfortable that I'm in the right place at the right time and I'm doing the right thing. And how it'll turn out, I'll leave to someone else, but I'll do what I've got to do.
I really appreciate the time you've taken to talk to me today about these really important matters. So thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. Thank you for interviewing me.